The ocean was quiet that night, too quiet. Captain Anya Moreno stood on the deck of the Nautilus Horizon, staring at the vast expanse of ink-black water that surrounded their research vessel. The rhythmic hum of the ship's engine was the only sound, a soothing pulse against the eerie stillness of the Pacific. The horizon seemed to merge with the sky, an endless void broken only by the faint shimmer of stars. But beneath that placid surface, something stirred. Sonar picked up movement again, came a voice from behind. It was Dr. Elias Kwan, the team's marine biologist, his usually calm demeanor tinged with unease. "It's big. Too big. This isn't a whale or a school of fish." Anya frowned, her fingers tightening around the railing. "How deep?" "Almost 7 miles, Elias replied. "Near the trench. 7 miles down, where life was scarce, where creatures existed only in nightmares. They were here to study one of the most unexplored regions on the planet, but this was different. The anomaly had appeared on their instruments 2 days ago, a shifting mass that defied classification. And now it was moving closer." The intercom crackled. "Captain, we're getting strange readings from the thermal scanners," said Mateo, the ship's engineer. "Temperature spikes are climbing faster than they should." Anya exchanged a glance with Elias. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Get everyone to the bridge. I want a full report." Minutes later, the team was gathered, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens displaying an array of data. Mateo pointed to one graph, his voice taut. "Look at this. Thermal fluctuations are off the charts. Something down there is generating heat, enough to destabilize the surrounding water columns." "How is that even possible?" asked Dr. Priya Malik, the oceanographer. "Nothing living can survive those conditions, let alone create heat at that scale." Elias leaned forward. "Unless it's not just a biological entity. What if it's something else?" Anya silenced them with a raised hand. "Enough speculation. We stick to protocol. Deploy the submersible drone. I want eyes on whatever this is." The drone descended into the depths, its floodlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. On the main screen in the control room, the team watched as it sank past jagged cliffs and swirling currents. The tension was palpable, every passing meter tightening the knot in their stomachs. At 35,000 feet, the lights caught movement, a flash of something pale and massive. The room fell silent as the drone's camera adjusted, revealing an enormous structure embedded in the ocean floor. It looked organic, but not entirely. A colossal, ribbed surface pulsed faintly, as if alive. Bioluminescent veins ran across its surface, casting an otherworldly glow. "What the hell is that?" whispered Mateo. Elias shook his head. "It's not coral. It's not a shipwreck. It's—" Before he could finish, a low, guttural sound reverberated through the speakers, a sound that didn't belong to any creature known to science. The drone's camera flickered, then stabilized, but the feed had changed. The glow from the structure had intensified, and the veins seemed to be moving, pulsing in sync with the sound. "Pull it back," Anya ordered. "Get the drone out of there." Mateo's fingers flew across the controls, but the drone didn't respond. "It's not coming back. Something's interfering with the signal." Suddenly, the sound grew louder, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate through the ship itself. Priya covered her ears, grimacing. "Turn it off. Whatever it is, it's—" The screens went black. The hum stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the team's ragged breathing. Then the power surged back, and the feed resumed. But the drone was gone. Instead, the camera now focused on a single object, a shard of black material, sleek and reflective, floating upward from the glowing structure. It moved with purpose, defying gravity, ascending toward the surface. Anya's heart pounded. "What is that?" No one answered. They watched in stunned silence as the shard broke free of the water, vanishing into the night sky. And then the ship trembled. The first explosion rocked the hull, sending everyone sprawling. Alarm sirens wailed as water sprayed from burst pipes. Anya scrambled to her feet, shouting orders. "Get to the engine room! Seal off the lower decks!" But before anyone could move, the intercom buzzed with static, and a voice, a soft, whispering voice, cut through the chaos. "Change is inevitable," it said. "And it begins now." The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling their minds like a parasite burrowing into their thoughts. Anya clutched her head, her vision swimming. She wasn't alone. The others were writhing, their faces twisted in agony. And then it stopped. Anya blinked, gasping for air. Around her, the team was regaining their composure, but something was wrong. Mateo's eyes glowed faintly like embers. Priya's skin had taken on a strange, translucent sheen. Elias's veins pulsed with a dark, metallic hue. What's happening to us?" Priya stammered, her voice trembling. No one answered. They were interrupted by a deep groan from the hull. The ship shuddered again, and a wave of icy water surged onto the deck. Anya stumbled, her gaze snapping toward the ocean. The surface was alive. Shapes were emerging from the water, twisted, skeletal figures with glowing eyes and jagged appendages. They moved with unnatural speed, climbing onto the ship like predators cornering their prey. Anya grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit and fired at the nearest creature. The flare struck its target, igniting it in a burst of fire. But the thing didn't stop. It lunged at her, its claws raking the air inches from her face. "Run!" she screamed, but there was nowhere to go. The ocean had come alive, and it was hungry. The Nautilus Horizon was a fortress under siege, its crew outnumbered, outmatched, and entirely unprepared. The creatures swarmed over the deck with horrifying fluidity, their movements a blend of unnatural grace and feral violence. They weren't just attacking, they were hunting. Anya ducked under a clawed limb that sliced through the air where her head had been seconds ago. The flare gun was empty now, its meager arsenal spent. Her only weapon was a wrench she'd grabbed from a tool chest on her way up from the engine room. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "Anya, this way!" Elias's voice cut through the chaos. She spun to see him waving her toward the hatch leading below deck. He was covered in scratches, his lab coat torn and bloodied, but his glowing veins made him look more like one of the monsters than her trusted colleague. Still, there was no time to question loyalties. She sprinted toward him, swinging the wrench at anything that came too close. One of the creatures lunged at her, its skeletal jaw snapping inches from her face. She shoved it back with a desperate kick and bolted through the hatch, Elias slamming it shut behind her. "Where's the rest of the crew?" she panted, her chest heaving. Elias shook his head grimly. "I don't know. I lost sight of them when the first wave hit." The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the corridor. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of salt and oil. Anya noticed that Elias's veins were pulsating more rapidly now, the dark metallic hue spreading under his skin. "What's happening to you?" she demanded. "I don't know," he whispered. "It started after that voice. I feel stronger, but it's like something's growing inside me." Anya backed away slightly, gripping the wrench tighter. She didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was clear. Whatever had emerged from the depths was transforming them, slowly but unmistakably. They made their way to the control room, stepping over the debris that littered the halls. The ship groaned with each wave, as if it were alive and in pain. Mateo was already there when they arrived, hunched over a console. His eyes glowed brighter than before, casting an ominous light over the instruments. "I managed to reboot the radar," he said without looking up. "But you're not going to like what I found." He tapped a few keys, and the main screen came to life, displaying a live feed from the ship's exterior cameras. The ocean was no longer dark and calm. It churned with bioluminescent swirls, pulsating with unnatural energy. The creatures crawling over the ship were just the beginning. In the distance, a massive shadow loomed beneath the waves, growing larger by the second. "What is that?" Anya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mateo turned to face her, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "It's rising. Whatever we saw down there, it's coming to the surface." The intercom crackled again, and the whispering voice returned, soft and insidious. "You are the heralds of a new age. Embrace the change, and you will become more than human. Shut it off, Anya shouted. I can't, Matteo replied. It's broadcasting directly through the ship's systems. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. Anya pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't help. It wasn't just a sound, it was in her mind, wrapping around her thoughts like a vice. She glanced at Elias and Matteo and saw them twitching, their bodies writhing as the transformation advanced. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently, throwing them to the floor. The screen flickered, and the cameras focused on the source of the disturbance. The shadow beneath the water was emerging. A monstrous shape broke the surface, towering over the ship like a living mountain. It was impossible to comprehend, its form shifting, growing, and splitting as though it were made of liquid and flesh and something entirely alien. The creature opened what might have been a mouth, and the whispering stopped. In its place came a sound so deep and resonant that it felt like the ship itself was disintegrating under its weight. Windows shattered, metal groaned, and water surged into the lower decks. We have to abandon ship, Anya yelled, pulling Elias to his feet. Matteo didn't move. His glowing eyes were fixed on the screen, his body trembling. It's beautiful, he murmured. Don't you see? It's not destroying us. It's remaking us. Matteo, snap out of it, Anya screamed. But it was too late. Matteo's body convulsed, and his skin split open, revealing a latticework of glowing veins and black, crystalline structures. He turned toward her, smiling as his transformation completed. Don't fight it, he said. It's the future. Anya didn't wait to find out what he meant. She grabbed Elias and bolted, leaving Matteo behind as the control room erupted in sparks and flames. They made it to the lifeboat station, but it was already overrun. The creatures were everywhere, tearing through the remaining crew like paper. Anya and Elias fought their way through, their makeshift weapons barely holding them off. Just as they reached the last lifeboat, a deafening roar shook the ship. The massive creature had fully emerged, its form stretching impossibly high into the sky. Its glowing veins pulsed in rhythm with the ocean itself, as if it were the heart of some vast, alien ecosystem. The lifeboat dropped into the water, and Anya scrambled to start the motor. Elias slumped beside her, his transformation accelerating. His veins were now fully metallic, and his eyes glowed like Matteo's. Anya, he said weakly, I don't think I'm going to make it. You're not leaving me, she said, her voice firm. We're getting out of here together. The creature let out another roar, and the waves surged violently, nearly capsizing the lifeboat. Anya gritted her teeth, steering them away from the ship as fast as she could. Behind them, the Nautilus horizon was consumed, dragged beneath the waves by countless tendrils of bioluminescent flesh. But the nightmare wasn't over. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing across the water. You cannot run. The transformation is only the beginning. Anya looked back at Elias. His skin was hardening, turning black and crystalline. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let go. The lifeboat sped into the night, carrying them toward an uncertain future. But deep down, Anya knew the truth. There was no escape. The lifeboat sped across the churning ocean, the motor straining against the rising waves. Anya gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white as she fought to keep them steady. The monstrous roar of the creature behind them still echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of the horror they had just escaped. But there was no time to think about what they had left behind, only what lay ahead. Elias was slumped beside her, his breathing shallow. The glowing veins now covered most of his body, and his skin had taken on a glossy, obsidian-like sheen. He was changing faster than she had anticipated. Elias, stay with me, Anya shouted over the roar of the waves. He opened his eyes, the glow within them flickering like dying embers. Anya, it's too late. You can't stop this. I'm not giving up on you, she snapped, her voice breaking. We'll find help. We'll fix this. Elias shook his head weakly. You don't understand. It's not just me. It's everywhere. This thing, it's in the water. In the air. There's no escaping it. Anya's heart sank. She wanted to argue, to deny what he was saying, but deep down, she knew he was right. The whispers were still there, faint but persistent, gnawing at the edges of her mind. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a creature, it was a force, a presence that was spreading like a virus. Suddenly, the lifeboat jolted violently, nearly throwing them both overboard. Anya glanced back, and saw something rising from the water behind them. It was one of the creatures, larger than the others, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. It moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. "Hold on!" Anya yelled, jerking the controls to the side. The lifeboat veered sharply, the creature lunging just as it passed. Its claws scraped the side of the boat, tearing a deep gash into the hull. Water began to pour in, and the lifeboat tilted dangerously. Anya grabbed a flare from the emergency kit and lit it, hurling it at the creature. The flare struck its chest, igniting it in a burst of fire. The creature let out a deafening screech, its body convulsing as it sank back into the depths. But the damage was done. The lifeboat was sinking. "Elias, we have to abandon ship," Anya shouted, grabbing the emergency life vest. Elias tried to move, but his body was stiff, his limbs barely responding. "Go without me," he murmured. "I'll only slow you down." "Not a chance," Anya said, wrapping an arm around him and hoisting him to his feet. "You're coming with me?" The two of them plunged into the icy water just as the lifeboat capsized. The cold hit Anya like a sledgehammer, stealing the breath from her lungs. She gritted her teeth and kicked hard, dragging Elias with her as they swam away from the wreckage. Above them, the night sky was illuminated by flashes of bioluminescent light. The massive creature was still visible in the distance, its glowing veins casting an eerie glow over the ocean. Smaller creatures swarmed around it, their movements synchronized as if they were part of a hive mind. Anya spotted a rocky outcrop jutting out of the water not far away. It wasn't much, but it was the only solid ground in sight. "Hold on, Elias," she said, struggling to keep them both afloat. "We're almost there." They reached the outcrop moments later, collapsing onto the jagged rock. Anya's body ached from the effort, her muscles screaming in protest, but she didn't care. They were alive, for now. Elias was barely conscious, his transformation nearly complete. His skin was now entirely black and crystalline, his body shimmering faintly in the dim light. Anya sat beside him, shivering as she tried to come up with a plan. "We need to signal for help," she said, her voice hoarse. "There has to be someone out there who can stop this." But even as she said the words, she knew how futile they sounded. The nearest ship was hundreds of miles away, and the radio had been lost with the lifeboat. They were alone in the middle of the Pacific, surrounded by creatures that defied understanding. Elias stirred, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "Anya, you have to leave me. Get as far away as you can." "No," she said firmly. "I'm not leaving you. We'll find a way to reverse this. We just need time." "We don't have time," he replied, his voice a hollow echo. "It's spreading too fast. Soon, I won't be me anymore." As if to emphasize his point, his body convulsed, the crystalline structures on his skin expanding and merging. Anya could only watch in horror as his form began to shift, his limbs elongating, his features becoming unrecognizable. "Elias," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Run," he said, his voice distorted, barely human. "Run before I—" His words were cut off by a guttural growl. His body jerked violently, and then he was gone, replaced by something monstrous. The creature that had once been Elias turned its glowing eyes on Anya, its movements predatory and alien. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Elias, if you're still in there, fight it," she pleaded. "Don't let it take you." For a moment, the creature hesitated, as if her words had reached some part of him that still remained. But then it lunged, its claws slicing through the air. Anya dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. She scrambled to her feet and ran, leaping from one jagged rock to another. The creature was right behind her, its movements unnaturally fast and fluid. She reached the edge of the outcrop and froze. There was nowhere left to go. The ocean stretched out before her, dark and unyielding. Behind her, the creature closed in, its glowing eyes filled with an otherworldly hunger. Desperation surged through her veins. She turned to face it, clutching a shard of rock she had picked up in her escape. "If you want me," she said, her voice steady despite the terror in her heart, "you'll have to fight for it." The creature roared, charging toward her. And then the ocean erupted. A massive tentacle, glowing with the same bioluminescent veins as the larger creature, burst from the water, wrapping around the monster that had been Elias. It screeched in protest, thrashing wildly as the tentacle dragged it back into the depths. Anya stared in stunned silence, her chest heaving. The water calmed once more, the outcrop now eerily quiet. But the whispers were louder than ever. "You cannot escape," they said. "The transformation has begun." Anya fell to her knees, her body trembling. She was alive, but for how long? The whispers were right. This was only the beginning. The whispers didn't stop, even as the sea grew still. They were in her head now, a relentless tide of promises and threats. Anya clutched her temples, trying to block them out, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean itself. "The transformation has begun." The words echoed over and over, each syllable burrowing deeper into her mind. She sat on the jagged rocks, soaked and shivering, staring at the horizon. The massive creature that had emerged from the depths was gone, but its presence lingered like a storm cloud. Bioluminescent streaks shimmered in the water, faint but undeniable, as if the ocean itself had become infected. A sudden sound jolted her, an engine. She turned, her heart leaping as a small fishing trawler emerged from the mist, its lights cutting through the darkness. The boat was old and rusted, but it was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in a nightmare that refused to end. Anya stumbled to her feet, waving her arms frantically. "Over here. Please." The boat slowed, its engine sputtering as it approached the outcrop. Two figures appeared on the deck, silhouetted against the glow of the ship's lights. One of them, a grizzled man in a rain-soaked jacket, called out to her. "You all right, miss? What happened here?" Anya didn't know how to answer. How could she explain what she had seen, what she had survived? She climbed aboard the trawler with their help, collapsing onto the deck as exhaustion finally caught up to her. "There's something in the water," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something alive." The man exchanged a worried glance with his companion, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a shotgun slung over her shoulder. "We've been hearing strange reports," the man said. "Ships disappearing, odd readings on the sonar. Thought it was just deep-sea anomalies. Didn't expect to find a survivor." Anya looked up at him, her face pale. "You shouldn't have come here. It's not safe." The trawler headed north, away from the outcrop and the cursed waters surrounding it. Anya sat in the cabin, wrapped in a blanket, sipping lukewarm coffee as she recounted what had happened. The man, who introduced himself as Captain Harland, listened in silence, his expression growing grimmer with every word. The younger woman, Mara, paced the cabin restlessly, her shotgun never far from her side. "You're saying this thing, it can infect people?" Harland asked. Anya nodded. "It's not just infection. It's a transformation. It's like it rewrites you from the inside out." Harland scratched his beard, his brow furrowed. "If that's true, we might already be in trouble. If the water's contaminated—" "We don't have time to theorize," Mara interrupted, her tone sharp. "If this thing is as bad as she says, we need to warn someone. The Coast Guard, the Navy, anyone." Anya shook her head. "You don't understand. It's not just in the water. It's in the air, in the whispers. It's everywhere." The cabin fell silent. Even Mara seemed unsettled, her usual confidence faltering. Suddenly, the trawler lurched, throwing them all off balance. The engine sputtered and died, leaving the boat adrift. Harland cursed, rushing to the controls. "What the hell was that?" Before anyone could answer, a low, resonant hum filled the air. Anya froze, her heart pounding. She knew that sound. "It's here," she whispered. The water around the trawler began to glow, the bioluminescent streaks converging like veins of light. Mara rushed to the deck, her shotgun at the ready, while Harlan tried to restart the engine. Anya followed, gripping the railing as she stared into the water. A shape was rising. It wasn't the massive creature from before, but something smaller, more humanoid. The figure broke the surface, its glowing eyes fixed on the boat. Anya's breath caught in her throat. It was Elias, or what was left of him. His crystalline body shimmered in the light, his movements unnaturally fluid. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he climbed onto the deck with a single, powerful leap, landing with a thud. Mara fired her shotgun, the blast echoing across the water. The shot struck Elias, but it didn't slow him down. The crystalline structure absorbed the impact, sending shards scattering like glass. "Get back!" Mara shouted, reloading. But Elias moved too fast. He lunged at her, his clawed hand swiping through the air. Mara ducked, barely avoiding the blow, and swung the shotgun like a club, smashing it against his head. It stunned him for a moment, but only a moment. Harlan emerged from the cabin, a flare gun in hand. "Get down!" he yelled, firing at Elias. The flare struck his chest, igniting in a burst of fire. Elias staggered, his body writhing as the flames consumed him. But then the whispers grew louder. Anya clutched her head, falling to her knees as the sound overwhelmed her. Harlan and Mara weren't immune, both of them staggering under the weight of the noise. The glowing veins in the water pulsed in rhythm with the whispers, and the air seemed to thrum with energy. The ocean around them erupted as more figures emerged, dozens of them, each one a twisted, crystalline nightmare. They surrounded the boat, their glowing eyes unblinking. "We're surrounded!" Mara shouted, her voice barely audible over the din. Harlan fired another flare, but it was hopeless. The creatures closed in, their movements synchronized, like a single, unstoppable entity. Anya stared at them, her mind racing. This wasn't just an attack. It was a message. "You cannot fight us," the whispers said. "You will become us." The creatures climbed onto the deck, their glowing forms illuminating the darkness. Mara and Harlan fought bravely, but it was a losing battle. The creatures were too strong, too fast. Anya stood frozen, her heart pounding as she realized there was no escape. And then, she felt it, the transformation beginning inside her. Her veins burned, her skin tingling as the infection spread. The whispers grew louder, filling her with a terrible certainty. This was the end. But as the darkness closed in, a strange calm washed over her. She looked at the creatures, their glowing eyes watching her, and for the first time, she understood. They weren't just monsters. They were something more, something beyond human comprehension, and she was becoming one of them. The last thing she saw before the transformation took her completely was the horizon, glowing with the light of a new dawn. It wasn't a sunrise. It was the beginning of the end. The ocean's depths had birthed a horror, and now, the transformation had spread across the world. Anya was no longer human. She was part of something greater, something infinite, and the whispers promised her one thing. The world would never be the same again.